The Third Reich sold the world this very sanitized image of German women, an image of pure motherhood that hid a reality that is just horrifying. For decades, when we've pictured the perpetrators of the Holocaust, we've pictured men. But today, we're going to uncover a shadow force that history almost completely forgot. So that brings us to this really chilling question. Was any of this even possible without the active participation of German women? We're going to strip away all the propaganda that idealized the Aryan mother. Because the truth is way more complex and frankly a lot more disturbing than the myth. So, where does this all start? Well, it begins with a powerful and, honestly, a very convenient myth. It's this idea of innocent domesticity that ended up serving as a shield for millions of women after the war, letting them just slip away from any real accountability. On one hand, you have the post-war excuse, innocent domesticity, children, kitchen, church. But the reality on the other side, it was a fully mobilized female population, one that was absolutely essential to the Nazi project right from the very beginning. Okay, so let's get into how they did this. You see, the Nazi state didn't just promote motherhood, they literally engineered it. And this had nothing to do with family values. This was about creating a biological factory for their so-called master race. The regime built this whole insidious system of incentives. It was an ideological trap, really. They'd offer state marriage loans, right? But the catch was, the debt was only forgiven if you produced racially pure children. Suddenly, the simple act of having a family became this state-sponsored project with very clear and very dark racial goals. And check this out. If a mother had 8 children, she earned the highest honor, the Gold Cross. It was this huge public celebration of her service to the Reich. But, and this is a huge but, this public program had a dark, secret twin operating completely in the shadows. And that brings us to Lebensborn. This was the end game, a human factory designed to produce an endless supply of Aryans. These children were literally bred to go colonize Eastern Europe, replacing the millions of people the regime was planning to exterminate. But then, by 1942, things started to go pretty badly for Germany. The demands of total war just completely shattered that domestic ideal. You see, the regime had been telling women their place was in the home, but now it needed them on the front lines of production and war. Just think about that number for a second. 500,000. 500,000 women put on a uniform. And we're not just talking about clerks shuffling papers way behind the lines. No, they became the eyes and ears of the entire German war machine, totally integral to its day-to-day operation. So what were they doing? Well, these women operated the searchlights, hunting for Allied bombers. They were the ones manning the radio towers that coordinated the absolute slaughter on the Eastern Front. And, back home, they were building the bombs. The so-called Aryan mother now had her hands stained with the grease of war. And this is where that terrifying transition happens. As the war got more and more intense, those support roles, they morphed into direct participation in genocide. The woman who was just filing paperwork was no longer a secretary. She was now compiling lists for execution squads. The line just vanished. Okay, now we have to confront the most shocking reality of all. We're talking about thousands of women who didn't just support the regime from a distance. They voluntarily served as guards in the most notorious concentration and death camps, proving, without a doubt, that cruelty has absolutely no gender. Let's focus on one person, Irma Gers. This was a name that prisoners feared, and get this, sometimes even more than the male SS guards. She was just a young woman, but she came to embody the absolute sadism of the entire camp system. The hyena of Auschwitz, that was her nickname. And believe me, that's a name she earned through acts of just unimaginable cruelty. Everything from random, vicious beatings to personally selecting prisoners for the gas chambers. She wasn't some unwilling participant. She absolutely relished her power. In the craziest part, she was only 20 years old when she held the power of life and death over tens of thousands of people. And she wasn't some kind of anomaly. She was joined by so many others, like Ilse Koch, the infamous bitch of Buchenwald, whose depravity shocked even other Nazis. But it wasn't all just about physical brutality. There was another, maybe even more insidious kind of killer, the desk murderer. These were the women in offices and hospitals whose quiet, bureaucratic efficiency enabled mass murder on an industrial scale. They would type up death warrants and then go home to cook dinner for their families. So what happens when the whole Reich just collapses? Well, this strange and incredibly convenient amnesia just sweeps the nation. The female guards threw away their uniforms, the secretaries burned their files, and thousands upon thousands of perpetrators simply disappeared right back into society. But, it is so important to remember that not every woman was complicit. Amidst this overwhelming conformity, there were true heroes. People like Sophie Scholl, who saw the motherhood propaganda for the death cult that it was. She and the White Rose movement, they risked everything. And in doing so, they showed the courageous path that millions of others refused to take. In the courtrooms, after the war, the excuses were tragically effective. I was just a wife. I was just a nurse. And the one that worked far too often, I was only a woman. The world simply struggled to see women as architects and executioners of mass murder. So we have to end by reframing the whole question. To truly understand the Third Reich, we have to acknowledge that for the regime, the ideal woman was never just a mother. She was also a willing and absolutely essential accomplice. The Holocaust wasn't a crime committed just by men in boots. It was a crime sustained by women at every single level of the state.